Join me for part 2 with Bruce Lee historian Bey Logan as we get the inside scoop on Bruce Lee's box office record-breaking Fist of Fury, the epic Return of the Dragon, and Bruce Lee's Game of Death. Enjoy.
Yeah.
Great. Well, I'm glad you cleared that up because there's been back and forth on that for forever now. The other thing I was wondering is, you see all the outtakes and the behind the scenes on Enter the Dragon. How come there was never any behind the scenes ever released on The Chinese Connection or even Fist of Fury? Are there outtakes on that or behind the scenes footage that you think is still around that they just never back then?
I think it goes back to my earlier answer that Peter Chung, the editor, said that there were deleted, like no good takes, there were deleted scenes and beats of it that they would keep on a reel in the editing rooms at Golden Harvest. But there was no obvious means of exploiting that. And nobody in a million years thought that in a few years' time Bruce Lee was going to pass away. So there was no sense of we better hoard this stuff because we're going to need it in a couple of years to do a Bruce Lee documentary. So I think that very quickly in the time during the time that Bruce was alive and making films, and during the immediate aftermath of his tragic passing, those film elements were deteriorating, or it was like stuff was being thrown out. But Peter Chung remembered that it was there for a while.
Wow.
So unquestionably, if anybody knows about the technology of editing film, you end up with a load of stuff that you don't use.
Right.
And again, from the horse's mouth, the editor said, we kept a lot of it, but we didn't have anything to do with it. And it wasn't like, even were they able to, I don't think they had the kind of men that would have been selling it out the back door.
So do you think, if you ever went, where do you think it's stored now? In the Golden Harvest Studios?
I think it was my own person. Now, by the way, I had a whole incorrect theory about the log scene, so I can just tell you what I think, and I don't want people to think it's the gospel truth. My own belief is that a lot of that material decayed and was thrown away over time in the immediate years of the 70s. If anything survived in the archive that people didn't know where or what it was, which was the case with the Game of Death footage, to be honest, that when the studios...
Which I can't wait to get to in a little while.
When the studios were finally destroyed in 1997, that would have gone the way of all flesh at that time.
Okay, because there is a lot of nice photos of behind the scenes and outtakes of Bruce from those films, but you've never seen any footage, not even clippable footage.
I had the pleasure of clearing out the Golden Harvest warehouse of all of the posters and lobby cards, and there were videos and things, hoping I would open a box and say, whoa,
this is new.
And I've had that experience before with other stuff, but there was sadly nothing like that.
Any other facts on Chinese Connection before we move to A Way of the Dragon that you can share that you
on Fist of Fury?
Yeah, on Fist of Fury, that is a kind of a fun fact that you don't think many people have heard of. I know you did the commentary on the Hong Kong Legends at the time, and it was eye-opening when I listened to it with the commentary at the time.
Right. Well, I think what was interesting was that the character that Fok Yun-ga, Ho Yun-ja, who is the man who's died at the beginning of the film, who's the teacher of Bruce Lee, was in a way a prototype Bruce Lee, because he was the guy that said, let's do away with the politics of established styles and systems, bring everybody under one roof. Zheng Mo-mun, the doorway, Jing Wu-men, the doorway to excellence in martial arts. The idea being that you do away with all these kind of set
patterns and
exactly. And then he had Bruce had also trained with Sifu Han. Sorry, I'm blanking on his name. There was another instructor who was also from Fist of Fury, from that school, Zheng Mo-mun, that he had trained with. Siu Han. We'll look at it later.
We'll look it up later.
But he was, Siu Sifu was also from that tradition. And if you look on the documentary Bruce Lee the Man of Legend, you see the very distinctive shield of Zheng Mo-mun, and Sifu Siu was one of the other teachers apart from Bruce Lee. Also had a Hongar teacher. He had a teacher from that northern style of Zheng Mo-mun, which is why you see him doing northern kicks and demonstrations and even Enter the Dragon. And then of course he had his main teacher, Yip Man.
Wow.
Su Han-san.
That's it.
Su Han-san.
Yes.
Sorry. Su Sifu, wherever you are, my apologies. Su Han-san.
Well, thank you for sharing that. That's a fun fact there, man.
Yeah.
So let's switch over to Way of the Dragon, because I want to try to get in all his films, and I know there's going to be a lot to speak to on Game of Death when we get to that. So I have some good questions for you on there. So on Way of the Dragon, again, another great film on Bruce. As a kid seeing that in '74, I was blown away again.
You saw it as Return of the Dragon.
Return of the Dragon here, and that's how it was marketed. Here in the States.
And boy, do we need him now.
Exactly. So that's what all the commercials said, and I couldn't wait to see it. I think I was 15 years old. Yeah. But at the time, I didn't even know that. Besides it being filmed in Rome, it was also then filmed in. Absolutely. Was anything filmed in Rome?
Oh yeah,
it was.
Basically, and I would say the same philosophy bears today for me as a filmmaker.
Yeah.
If you you go on location, if you go to another country and you go shoot everything you need to shoot exterior that establishes the other country, but the interior stuff you do in a studio. Now sometimes you go into a studio in that other country, and sometimes you have studio space in your native land, and you come back and do it there because it's cheaper because you own your own studio.
Okay, is that what they did?
Exactly.
So they went back to Golden Harvest?
Yeah, they could have rented, studios in Rome, but why spend the money renting and lighting and operating studios in Rome when you have them in Golden Harvest kind of for free? So they shot everything in Rome and then came back and did the.
Now, originally, do you think Bruce wanted to film it in the Coliseum? Was he hoped to actually film the fight scene with Chuck Norris in the Coliseum? But then I heard they couldn't get permits, and so they were forced to go back and recreate the set.
No,
right?
I think that in going there initially, Bruce had this magnificent idea. Well, I'm going to have a modern day gladiators fighting in the Colosseum. And I had that mindset. Then he gets there. There's a couple of problems with it. Well, one, of course, is the state of the Colosseum now. There's angles of it that perhaps don't look so good. The other thing was to even get permission to shoot what they shot was quite daunting.
Wow.
So I think after a while, and the other thing is the pressure from Raymond Chow going, listen, Bruce, the longer you spend money in Rome, the longer it's going to take us to recoup the cost of the film.
Yeah.
But if we come back and do it in Hong Kong, we just build an interior that looks like and I think it paid off because, to be honest with you, for me as not even I would say a child, but as a young man, up until when we really started to find out about this stuff, I thought they shot that I thought that was the Colosseum.
So did I. They did a good job
with that. And later you go, oh, hang on a minute, and you realize. But most people thought it was the Colosseum.
Yeah. Same here.
Wow. There are a few, if you're nerdy, like we watch the films repeatedly, there are a few jump cuts between stuff shot in Rome, even stuff shot in Hong Kong where it doesn't quite match.
Yeah. When Norris is standing between the columns and he puts the thumb down, you think that was in the Coliseum? That was, right? Yeah, you could see that.
But things like when they're training in the yard outside at the restaurant, shot in Hong Kong, and when they come into the restaurant, there's people swap around.
Yeah.
We didn't have anybody on set like what we would call a script supervisor. When I first came to visit Hong Kong, when I first started making films, we didn't have a script supervisor. So it's amazing that more stuff wasn't wrong.
Yeah, I got you.
But again, you noticed that on the 50th viewing. So
exactly. Right? So the other thing I heard is that Bruce was intending to use Joe Louis in the fight scene, and instead, as playing Colton, instead they used Chuck Norris. What was the reasoning behind that?
Well, I spoke to Joe Louis about that. Sadly, he's no longer with us, and I don't think it was ever a specific thing that he said, I want to bring you to Rome. We're going to do a movie. It's going to be you and me. It's going to be your favorite cold, and we have a duel in the Colosseum. It was just at that time, and if you look at the two of them. The guy that was the most impressive opponent and the guy that should have had a bigger movie career is Joe Louis. Good looking, incredible physique.
Yes.
He looked like a big blonde Bruce Lee.
He did.
And so Bruce was like, we'll do a movie where we'll fight. And there were a couple of things I think that prohibited that. One was the massive ego of Joe Louis.
That's right.
That I think he was going to go, I'm not going to go to do a movie in China and be killed by Bruce Lee. Secondarily, I think there was a falling out instigated by Joe Louis's wife, these girls, that caused a rift between him and Bruce. And John Little talks about it in his wonderful book, Fury of the Dragon?
Wrath of the
Dragon.
Yes.
Where he talks in detail about that. So you should read John's book to find out more about that clash. But that created bad blood that was not really resolved before Bruce Lee died, so that was the reason. But I don't think the dates were not such that Bruce was getting ready to do Way of the Dragon and seriously thought of Joe Louis. he went to Chuck instead.
Got ya.
Who was a kinder, gentler karate champion.
Yeah. And it's funny how Bob Wall always works his way in there somehow.
Yeah.
In all the Bruce films, and all of a sudden Bob shows up.
Wow.
To get in there
was
as
a
well,
character, Bob.
wasn't he? Yeah, he I met him a few times at some conventions. What a character, man.
Bob's my student. Yeah. He just, from what I understand, because if you hear Bob's version of it, he should have been the guy fighting Bruce Lee. But I think what happened, from what everybody else said, and in some interviews Bob said that, was that Chuck said, I'm off to Rome to do this movie with Bruce, and Bob was running the business side of the operation. He says, you're not going without your partner. So then he shows up, and Bruce being Bruce says, hey, okay, good, then, Chuck, you're going to be the guy that I fight in the Coliseum, and you can be his student, Bob, and I'll put you in the movie as well.
So he kind of worked that in, kind of off the cuff. Most really no big script, right? I heard.
It was much like, there's an Italian theatrical form called commedia, and it's kind of like where there are specific characters. People know that they're going to come into a scene and the general action of the scene, and then kind of, it's a bit beyond that, because in commedia it's really total improvisation. But that's the build. You don't get a script at the beginning to research your character arc and motivation and method, none of that. And on the day, there'd be a guy saying, you say this and you say that. And by the way, that persisted up until the 2000s.
Wow.
When I first started working on some films like Gen X Cops, Gen Y Cops, as a scriptwriter, it was not just, you write the script in the office, bring it on the set, and then give it to us and we prepare. It was almost, you come on the set, and the director, rest his soul, Benny Chan, would say, all right, Bey, he needs to, and then I need to get, and you get to that. And then I would say, what about the camera? He says, oh, you do that too.
Oh, God.
What an amazing, immersive experience. Yeah. But the dialogue, and I was working with Paul Rudd, who later played Ant-Man, and later he would say his best line that he ever said was, what was it? Roseanne Barr Arnold will be president of the United States before you two punks see the light of day. But that was just on the set. You say this, you say that, you say this. Boom, and then we go. And I said to Arthur, the cameraman, you bring the camera. Now, you go, this is in the supposedly professional, organized digital 2000s. So you go back to 1972, and it was the Wild East. And so, they absolutely, you didn't know day to day, coming on the set, what you were going to shoot, what you were going to say.
Wow. So it was fly by the seat of your pants.
Yeah, you had like an outline.
Yeah, I got you.
And that was the way they did it. But, by the way, you look at the movies they made then, that we made since, and you look at what's being made as a Hong Kong film, Chinese film aficionado, for so many years I feel I can have an opinion. And as a filmmaker, I don't think the films we're making today certainly are not better than those. Right. In my opinion, significantly worse. But maybe there are some good ones. But it's like those professional systems have not made the films better.
Got you.
When they were being made more extemporaneously, they turned out amazing.
Amazing. Wow, so funny, so funny.
Yeah.
Well, listen guys, if you guys have any other questions for Bey that I may not get to, because I want to get through all Bruce's films, you could always ask those questions in the comments, and when we release these videos, Bey will be more than happy to answer some of your comments on some questions that you may have. Yeah. You up for that?
I'm definitely.
All right, fantastic. Because I'm going to move on because I want to get through some of these other things. So let's move over to Game of Death.
Yes, same on hey.
So 1978, they release Game of Death, and I want to just start by, only 11 minutes of Bruce, right? And as a kid back then, I think I was 18 now, and I was like, we only got 11 minutes. So first off, what did you think about that film back in '78? It wasn't my favorite film. I thought it was kind of disrespectful to put it together in the way that Raymond and Robert Klaus did. I thought they could do Bruce more justice than the 11 minutes and the storyline. So I was not a big fan of it. I love seeing Bruce in that 11 minutes. But what's your thoughts on that? And why do you think they only used 11 minutes at that time?
Well, I think, firstly, for me, I have to separate the guilty pleasure and the nostalgia of Game of Death from analyzing it as a piece of filmmaking. Okay. And it's a very shoddy piece of filmmaking, and there's no reason for that. They had the time, they had the money. I think, apart from Enter the Dragon, and I would say Battle Creek Brawl, a lot of the other work that Robert Klaus did, he was something of a hack. And he came in and it was really a job for hire. I don't think he had any emotional content. He was not really like, wow, this is a great opportunity for me to express my directorial skill. he saw it for what it was Raymond Chow had done this deal. He'd sold the rights to Japan for a huge amount of money, and he had to deliver a Bruce Lee Game of Death or give the money back. Raymond looked at the footage, and where a more sensitive and a more kind of inspired director might have gone, well, you know what? Okay, we'll do this, we'll do this, we'll do this, and use every inch of film that we can, every foot of film we can to capture what Bruce Lee did. Raymond came in and said, I really hate the yellow tracksuit tower footage. I'm going to use as little as possible, and I'm going to direct as many scenes as I can, because this is my movie and I'm the director. So they had these things like, the doubles of BruceLee and all those kind of rather creaky old actors brought in from Hollywood.
Terrible.
And then you had like, the kind of the famous cut-off face. But I mean, that's me examining the film from a clinical point of view. I still look at it and go, oh, Game of Death, I remember when. So I still have a kind of a soft spot
in your heart
because of my memories of it. But at the same time, yes, you do look at that and you think, my God, this could have been done so much better. It's definitely, see, this industry is so strange. I mean, it's like you can have something that is commercially successful and therefore justifies its existence, but doesn't really stand the test of time. And you might have a film that's really under, appreciated, and then later, and I've had it in my own career, films that were hits that are now forgotten, and films that were flops that people now come back to me and say, I really liked such and such. So, in the case of Game of Death, whatever the goal was of Golden Harvest, it was met. People bought this film as it's Bruce Lee's last stand. This is the last Bruce Lee movie, the last chance you have to see the real Bruce Lee. And it did fantastic business, and as you probably know, they even cobbled together a sequel.
I know, which was probably better than the original.
Well,
some enjoy it better.
I felt and basically made a seasonal film using a bit of Bruce Lee material, and had Yuen Woo-ping come in and do Bruce Lee style action, and it is kind of entertaining.
It's entertaining,
but again, there were enough serious filmmakers in the world and serious filmmakers at Golden Harvest in Hong Kong that you could have done something better. But I think that there was, in the wake of Bruce Lee's passing, a sense of like, the world wants Bruce Lee. Sadly, we don't have him anymore, but we're just going to give them something and satisfy the demand, and we're going to make some money doing it. And I'm a bit disappointed perhaps a little bit in Raymond Chow that he wasn't more like, this is my brother in arms.
Exactly.
We want to do something.
I would think. So on the Game of Death, so they had the footage then, because I know that you eventually found this 90 minutes of footage. Right. Some people think it was John Little, but I know it was you that found the footage.
No, it was Alan Canva.
Alan Canva will take credit for finding the footage.
No, it was me.
But I like
certainly those guys have played with it more than I have.
Yes.
But I was the one that discovered it.
So tell us how you discovered that footage and what made you go about seeking it at the time, or did you just stumble across it?
I was just the right guy in the right place at the right time, and it was like I was in a position of some authority. I was a mid-level executive at Media Asia Film Company, which I don't think any of these other gentlemen have ever worked within the film industry in Hollywood, let alone in Hong Kong, in any position of authority. And I can tell you, there's a huge difference between being perceived as a crazed fan aficionado and being on the salary of a major film studio as an executive. It's just a different mindset. And when I went to was at Media Asia, one of my of the many other responsibilities I had was I was working primarily with and for Jackie Chan, but my remit was also the Bruce Lee field because they knew I was a Bruce Lee expert. So we were taking the delivery of all the materials from Golden Harvest Studios, which was closing down. Well, actually, we got the materials first. Later, the studio closed down. But we went there, and I got the job of logging everything. So I went in and asked them, do you have anything that's a reel of film that's got Bruce Lee on it? And they kind of had to tell me because I was a Media Asia executive. Not brush me off. They might have done John Little, meaning well though he was, they might have brushed him off and said, we're not getting paid to answer this guy's question. In my case, they kind of had to. So then they said, we got this reel of film which turned out to be the Game of Death footage, and there was a smaller reel which turned out to be some cut footage from a Chinese version of Enter the Dragon. So those were the two big finds that I had at that time.
Wow.
And then later, of course, much more stuff has been found. But those are the two big ones that I found.
So the 90 minutes of Game of Death, right? That's what John Little used to put together Warrior's Journey.
I sold it to him.
So you sold it to him.
The process was, I found after finding that they had the footage, I said, lace it up, let me take a look at it. And the beginning of it was all clips and bits and pieces from the trailer sequence, bits from the 1978 Game of Death, bits from the credit sequence, and then suddenly, bam, Dan running, James Chen running up the stairs, and all that you see of that.
Wow.
And I was just sitting there like, you know, whoa, whoa, whoa. And then I came back to the offices and tried to explain to my Chinese colleagues why this was like the Holy Grail.
Yeah.
And they only believed it when we started selling it, when people started making offers to buy it, because it was like, whoa, he's right. And there was a period, I could have done two things. I could easily have just kept it for myself, but I was never that kind of Gollum.
Yeah.
I wasn't like, man, precious. No, I was just like, I wanted to
got
share it with the world.
collectible that no one has.
The other thing was, in the immediate wake of discovering it, I actually in the end felt some sympathy for the guys in 1978.
Yeah.
Because one, Game of Death, had it been finished, was going to be one weird-ass Bruce Lee movie.
Oh yeah.
But secondarily, with all the, you know, you had people that died, aged, Bruce Lee had died, obviously. What do you do around this to make a finished film? And I actually came up with several concepts and presented them to the board at Media Asia, and they were just like, and now, as a producer with the experience I have now, I probably could have made it work. But at the time, my only idea was, I work for you, you're making films, we can do a Bruce Lee movie. Let's do it. And they just said no.
Oh wow.
So I, in retrospect, could have gone to Warner Brothers, like John did, or other distributors, and said, I have the footage, nobody else has the footage, and I'm going to do this, can you pay me for it? Which John ended up doing, and good for him. I didn't at the time, and I also did not have any great interest to do a documentary. There'd already been this Bruce Lee the Legend, which had used a lot of the footage.
Yeah, and that was a great documentary.
Right, so I didn't want to do that, and John did this kind of, it was like a History Channel recreation of the scene.
It was almost like the storyline.
But I wanted to get one of the versions that I had, and it was the obvious one, was I was dear friends then and am now of Donnie Yen, who I think pound for pound was the best, the most gifted of the Bruce Lee, of the action martial arts after Bruce Lee. And he at that time was kind of, his career was foundering, he wasn't going anywhere. And I said to him, you know what we'll do? We're not going to pretend like the 1978 Game of Death. We're just going to say, for these scenes, Bruce Lee is played by Donnie Yen. And for these scenes, he's played by Bruce Lee. And I think you could, if you do it in an intelligent way and you're honest with the audience, you can kind of get away with it.
It could have worked, and, I think so. Especially by Donnie Yen. He's great.
What is going to sound crazy now is that at the time, Donnie was perceived as a failed actor. It was only later when I brought him back to do Twins Effect that he then had a rebirth of his career. And you're welcome, Donnie. But no, it was like, I mean, the fact of the matter is, people say, oh, you take credit for it. You really can't take credit for anybody else's genius.
Right.
Donnie's a genius.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was one who realized that. But if he'd come back and not been able to deliver, no one can help him.
Yeah, I get you.
But it was like, that was my first, I was ahead of my time in saying, this guy, long before Yip Man, this guy can be a star if you put him in the right vehicle.
Wow.
And that was the first
changed
pitch.
the course of history.
I know.
Man. We could have got Donnie Yen playing Bruce up to the point we had 40-minute footage going.
The different, I never gave up on him, and I'm so proud to see the success he's had. But definitely, I had two tracks. One was working with Jackie, who was already super established.
Yes.
The other was trying to find opportunities to work with Donnie, because we were such good friends that I still felt he had not had his due, which came later.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. So what was the Enter the Dragon portion that you found? Was that
so strange?
What was that? That small reel?
It's a reel of footage, and it's Bruce speaking Cantonese, and Betty Chung speaking Cantonese, and Sek Keen speaking Cantonese, in scenes that are in the, for example, when Bruce Lee does you know, like outside.
Yeah, outside.
Then in the Cantonese version is Chutbina. He's doing, you read the lips. And even I met Fred Weintraub, nobody could remember or admit to a Cantonese version being begun and abandoned. And it's an odd thing, because all the films were shot wild, without sound. So the fact that the footage exists shows that this happened.
Did it have audio on it or no? No, but you could see it was.
Yeah.
They were speaking Cantonese
Correct.
at the time.
Another advantage of being a Chinese Cantonese speaker.
Got ya. And they used a lot of those clips with in the Game of Death 2, right? When he's speaking with her in the room and it's going back and forth.
Same source, but I don't think any of us realized when we saw Game of Death 2 that this was from, maybe if I go back and look at it again I'll think differently, but I don't remember having that realization of, hang on a minute, they're speaking Chinese in the scene.
Yeah.
And there was another fellow, another great guy, Walt Missingham, who was a great rival of John Little. John was very worried about Walt getting the Game of Death footage. So he was kind of like trying to call up all my Chinese colleagues. And finally one of them put the head on, can you get rid of this Guilo foreign devil, he keeps calling it.
Guilo!
So I dealt with John, and we did the deal with John for the Game of Death footage, but I sold the
Enter the Dragon
to Walt, who did another documentary. And you know what, I'm getting so old now, I can't remember the names of all the documentaries.
That's okay.
John did Warrior's Journey.
Yes. A Warrior's Journey.
Walt did Path of the Dragon, I think.
That was a good one too, Path of the Dragon, yes. Yeah. Wow, interesting.
Always the bridesmaid. It was always this giving out the footage to these people. But I had my chance in the end.
I personally loved The Warrior's Journey. What did you think of John's work on that?
I thought he set a vision and met that goal.
Yeah.
I know when it was done, maybe there was an anticipation in his part that he would have a further career as a director. Maybe there was an anticipation on the part of Warner Brothers that this would have more mainstream appeal than it did. But as I say, you make work that is respected and I think everybody respected and appreciated Johnson, but I don't think the results were what he anticipated. He, when I was at Media Asia, brought in the script for Bruce's film Lam Kun Bap Toi, Northern Fist, Southern Leg. And we were genuinely interested in producing it. And the reason it never happened is that John insisted that he had to direct it. And so everybody just...
Now that was the film that he was dressed in the warrior outfits, right?
Yeah.
So the blind swordsman and all those characters he was playing.
And then we were still... I mean, we never seriously considered making the film with Bruce directing it. But my recollection was then the estate, Shannon was taking over, and they kind of said, no, we don't want to do it with Media Asia. And then it was never done anywhere else. It's kind of a shame, because I think at that time, I think we were looking at someone like Stanley Tong or Corey Yun to direct in China. I was thinking, we should use Donnie, this can be his breakthrough film. The script was interesting because it was written by Bruce, but by the time Bruce had passed away, if you read the script, Bruce was too old to play the role because the guy was a young, very young character. Like he was, naive young guy, and it's extraordinary to me how long it took for Bruce to be recognized. That he's already in his 30s. And there was that whole window of 20 to 30 where we did get to see him in movies. And even he's a little old for Big Boss, to be honest with you, to play the young guy. But definitely too old for Lam Kun Bap Toi.
Wow, interesting. So what was your take on the storyline of Game of Death and the 5 floors, and what was he searching for on the top floor? Can you expand a little bit upon that? The storyline that he had envisioned at the time, Bruce?
I hope you can tell me. I looked at
what was he running up the tower for? What was
the big disappointment to me was that he never goes to the top of the tower. Andre Morgan, who was in some way, definitely has been my mentor and was like career-wise a forerunner for myself, which is a white guy working as a producer in a Hong Kong film company. He was at Golden Harvest, I was at Media Asia, but nobody else, I don't think anybody else has had that particular career path. So I looked to him for a lot of advice, and also he was there on the ground working on this work with Bruce Lee personally, and he said that they had worked on, Bruce was very much working on an outline and spontaneously throwing things in. We could put Kareem Abdul-Jabbar in there. And that there had been handwritten documents indicating what Bruce wanted to do. Much of that has been lost to history. Some of it does survive because you can see the beat by beat guides. But I don't think anybody knows, and I think that there was this whole thing of like, was Lee Kun, was he the key master, and he yells out to him, he's going to come up. And open a box.
I hear you. Wow, I heard different things that the top floor, you know, he opens a box and he sees a mirror of himself, and you know,
Like Silent Flute.
Yeah, and then the truth is found within yourself, type of thing, right?
Yeah.
This kind of philosophical type of thought process. But who knows? I mean, I just read that somewhere. And
Well, if I would have done my version of it, I would have cut after he killed Jabbar,
Okay.
and had Donnie go up and look and do that with the mirror
oh, that would have been cool.
to give the film an ending.
Yeah, yeah,
And then
it
have
needed
Bruce,
it. It needed
have
that.
Bruce stagger down the
Yes,
tower.
yes.
And
Because we got those scenes, right, of him staggering down the tower
Yeah.
after he, you know, completed the 5 floors.
which has been anticlimactic.
Yeah, it really was. So, what do you think? People talk about this all the time. If Bruce finished the Game of Death the way he intended it to be shot and finished, how do you think that would have compared to his other films? And do you think that would have been his best work, or do you think Enter the Dragon?
I think it would have been his weirdest work.
his weirdest work.
Dark, strange story. He's killing people without real motivation to kill them. He doesn't really resolve the story, at least in what we see.
Yeah.
Jabbar and the pink eyes. It's a strange.
It's a
movie.
strange, yeah.
It's a movie from a guy that's, you know, smoked weed and maybe taken some other things
Yeah,
as well.
yeah.
But in 1973, had Bruce Lee lived in the wake of Enter the Dragon and the other films, he could have released Bruce Lee Does the Laundry, and it would have been commercially successful. So I think there's no question of that. Whether it would have been regarded as this is the pinnacle of his career. And I have a suspicion, and it is just that, but also based on my conversation with Andre Morgan, because I remember what Andre said is that when Enter the Dragon came along, they suspended production on Game of Death.
Right.
Bruce said to him, "Thank God, this gives me some time to figure out how to finish
Okay.
Game of Death."
So he really didn't have the full story himself yet.
I suspect he might have come back with all of the offers and all of the heat of the unexpected massive success of Enter the Dragon, because we thought it would be a hit. They thought it would be a hit, but not that much.
Right.
He may well have looked back at Game of Death and said, you know what, I'm going to make a documentary out of it, I'm going to do something else with it, or I suppose the most extreme thing, he might have been like, I won't release it
I'll
right
just
away.
abandon the project, right? Yeah.
Just keep it there and figure out what to do with it later. And there are
Because it would almost,
precedents
if
for
it
that.
didn't come out great, it would almost took a step back to Enter the Dragon, right? And he wouldn't want that, right?
Well, for example, there was when Clint Eastwood went to do the Dollars films in spaghetti westerns.
Yeah.
He also filmed a role in a contemporary Italian film called The Witches. I think it's called The Witches. But anyway, and then I think it was whoever distributed Fistful of Dollars, those films.
Yeah, those
I think
were fine.
Universal.
Yep.
Bought the rights and shelved the film because that this was not advancing Clint Eastwood's
His
career.
Yeah.
Now it's available to see.
Yeah.
But that was it. So there's precedence for films being shelved because they might limit the career of the lead.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
player.
That makes sense.
But it's a big question mark, and
Yeah.
it is an interesting piece of work. I think as much is interesting as much.
Stay tuned for part 3 with Bruce Lee historian and author Bey Logan as we conclude our interview, finishing off our discussion on Bruce Lee's Game of Death and moving on to Bruce Lee's masterpiece, Enter the Dragon, with much more facts and gems on Bruce Lee coming soon.